kick off, and he would just laugh. Okay, Timmy, we're gonna figure you out eventually. You know, we spent the rest of that first summer there, you know, trying to figure out, you know what I'm saying, how to do these moves. And of course, you always have the Messiah, the dude who has paid attention to what Timmy's doing close enough. Doesn't matter that he didn't tell us how to do the moves. Dude finally figures it out. He's like, okay, this is. He's holding back and then pushing forward. I'm gonna tell you that right now. You know what I'm saying? There's something going on. He's holding down. He must be pushing up and kicking somehow, but we don't know when. And if this guy, you know, was the engineer, nowadays he's probably a real life engineer or something, because he figured it all out. And so you know, the Messiah, our Savior that went and figured out how to do all of these moves, he spread it. He spread it like a virus. You know, he was just as sick and tired as all the rest of us was about being beat by Timmy O'Toole, who was always getting beat down before he knew the moves. So he let us. He spread the information, and so we started learning these moves. And you know, of course, we beat Timmy down bloody. You know, as soon as he came to the arcade, everyone gave him a hard time, and we all made sure that we passed the sticks and beat him. We took turns to beat him with these moves now. You know, the secret's out, buddy. No more wins on us, you know what I'm saying? And so that's how the stuff starts, you know what I mean? And that is very important. That's like pivotal importance, because now that everybody knows a majority of the moves, that's the first time where you actually start seeing the intermediate player show up. You know, the intermediate player is the guy who can actually beat the game. He can beat the game, you know. That's very intermediate. You know, you can't call someone a novice if they can beat the game, if they can beat Street Fighter. No, you're not a novice. I don't care if you're a housewife and you're a button matching. If you beat M. Bison, even at skill level, you know, difficulty level setting 4, whatever it is, okay, you're doing something right. You're doing it right enough that you're not a noob anymore. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you beat the game, you know, and pretty much all of the games, pretty much. I mean, some of them are a little too easy now, but you know, that's kind of a notch to put on the belt too. If you can manage to beat that game, hey, what can anyone tell you? You're pretty much either close to there or you're there. You're at that intermediate level we're talking about. And I didn't get there for years. I was a late bloomer, people. I was the last one to know the moves. You want to know why? I'll tell you, because something magical happened in the midst of all this madness where people were starting to learn the moves. The friends I hung out were still trying to hold them. They weren't telling everybody how to do the moves. So, you know, I'm still using Chun-Li, you know. And this went on all the way up until the World Warrior came out on the SNES. And when it came out on the Super Nintendo, you know, as thrilled as all of us were, all my friends, they were up in it trying to use these moves, you know, and stuff. I was sticking with Chun-Li. I was like, okay, well, you guys can have your little fireballs and whatnot. And, you know, once in a blue moon I would beat them, but I was clearly the worst player out of all my friends, bar none, easily. You know, I was always getting beat. You know, I hated that, and I always had that, you know, I hated losing. You know, I always had that. I never liked to lose. Hated. I was always trying my best to win, and, you know, sometimes I would. You know, despite all their little dragon punches and fireballs and yoga flames and yoga fires everywhere, you know, sometimes I'd win. But, most times I lost. And, you know, so I want to say it was maybe another year and a half after Street Fighter was already released, you know, for the for the Super Nintendo. I did not own a Super Nintendo, folks. I had all the Sega Genesis games. You know, I was the Sega kid. You know, I thought Sonic was cool and Mario was Fat Plumber. You know, that's even though I used to have Mario and own them all, you know, I couldn't help myself. Sonic was just cool. It's something about the shoes. I don't know. He was fast. I liked it. So I jumped on the Sega bandwagon. And since I didn't own the SNES, you know, I didn't have the opportunities to play when I wanted to. You know, if I wanted to play Street Fighter, I had to go to my friend's house. And, you know, we have to have a gaming session, whatever. So I didn't learn these moves, you know. These moves were still a mystery to me. I thought they were too hard to do. And, you know, so how it happened for me, I didn't get to an intermediate level until I finally was hanging around with that right friend who was like, oh, why didn't you just ask? I'll tell you the moves. You know, I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, well, the reason it's hard to explain. He's like, you gotta slide your thumb like this. He's like, that's what that is. He called it down forward. You gotta do down forward punch, man, down forward punch. I'm like, down forward, you know. Every time he said that, I'm so used to tapping. I'm like, okay, tap down, tap forward, punch. Didn't work. Okay, what's next? And he's like, no, it's a sliding motion, man. Got to slide. Got to keep your thumb on the controller. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, you know. I figured, and so, you know, through his help, he gave away the info. He spilled the beans, and I learned how to throw a fireball. It was amazing, folks. You know, I think we need a moment of silence or something. It was just the turning point in my Street Fighter career. I was now, you know, getting close to being that guy that could actually win because I was throwing fireballs and I was throwing hurricane kicks. It's just the fact that the hurricane kicks and the fireballs were similar motion. All it was down back kick. So I started winning. You know, I wasn't just playing anymore. I started winning, and I was picking other characters, and you know, this was new for me to be on top. My friends didn't like that. They didn't like that at all, you know. About that, so I went to another friend's house. And I went to another friend's house who knew how to do these moves. He's the one who taught me how to do the dragon punch. And that's what was really strange, is the way he taught me how to do the dragon punch. He's like, okay, you gotta, it's forward, down, and then the little diagonal, down, forward, whatever. And I was like, okay, this is what's really weird. What happened was, I used the weak punch version of it, and I did it the very first time I tried. It's like, man, this is easy. I was like, bam, sure you can, and, you know, oh my gosh, that was great, you know. And the weird thing that happened was, I was like, okay, I just started doing it over and over again. This was like natural to me. I'm sure you can, sure you can, sure you can, sure you can, you know, and I started getting the timing so good, you know, I could just do it over and over again without missing. And, you know, to my friends, that was freaking incredible that I could do this so often, you know, 10, 20, 30 times in a row. Wouldn't mess up. You know, they try it and it would be like, sure you can punch. Sure you can punch. Sure you can, sure you can, sure you can short punch. You know what I'm saying? They're missing it. And, you know, I found out that I had that natural ability. So, you know, kind of a part of stepping towards that intermediate skill level, something has to do with it about having gifts. You know, I think gifts are God-given, and you're born, certain people are born with certain things, and I just always had that natural ability to execute. You know, it kind of is, it's still with me, you know, despite the fact I don't play games quite as much now. You know, I can just play, I can just go. You know, it's the first realization that maybe the stories of people like Beethoven and Mozart were true. You know, these guys literally were born able to play the piano, you know, just could go. Because that's how it was with me, you know. From that point in time, now that I knew that particular movement, you know, I could do all the moves. You know, I could do all the Shoto's moves. I can do the fireball, whatever, you know, whatever was there, I could finally figure it out. And, you know, it's kind of a shame that for years I didn't actually read the magazines that I have. By now, after the SNES version came out, finally they've published how to do the moves. I still refuse to read it. You know, I didn't read the magazines. I was trying to figure this stuff out on my own. I don't know why. But, yeah, I mean, I had to have somebody kind of show me and tell me first. And, you know, everybody learns different, so that's how I turned out to be. I was like, I'd rather have someone show me, tell me. But once I knew the information, man, I could perform. And I just kind of recognized that as, hey, that's something special. It's a gift. Maybe that's just one of those things I was born with because I can just do it. You know, and it was probably late by the time I actually had the opportunity to buy Street Fighter, you know, for any console. I think I had the Sega Saturn. And finally, the very first Street Fighter game I bought was Street Fighter Alpha 2. You see how late that is? I mean, we're talking about, it had to have been 96, 97, something like that, you know, for the Saturn. So, you know, I had never owned Street Fighter, but I was able to do very well with it before. And when I was that old playing the game, you know, at basically middle to end of high school, you know, that's when I really started getting really good. And, you know, this is kind of the next, I guess, podium or step or whatever it is for me with skills. With skills, after that intermediate level, there becomes this point where you get really, really good. You know all of the moves and can figure out, you know, you have the ability to figure out the moves if you don't know them. You know what I'm saying? And that's where I was at. It was like the Renaissance era, you know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, I didn't have many people later because I had moved once again, you know, still living on the East Coast, but moved to yet another state. You know, I've lived everywhere, man. I've lived New York, New Jersey, you know, Maryland, Virginia. I've lived, you know, in so many different places. And towards the end of high school, there was nobody at my high school playing, man. There was a handful of people. There was a handful of people, maybe 5 people that were willing to play, but out of those 5, maybe 2 of them, including myself, were good. You know what I'm saying? That's literally how high school was, and it was a terrible environment for competition in PvP because it was non-existent. The chances that I actually got to play against people, well, you're talking 2 to 3 times a year this came up. You know what I'm saying? 2 to 3 times a year, somebody invites everyone to their house, and you have like a group of, 5 to 10 folks, and everyone's just going to try and play anything, Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter, whatever. And so, because I wasn't in that PvP environment anymore with the consoles, I was forced to constantly train. I didn't know this, I didn't know what it was called, but because I played Street Fighter all the time, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't any slouch. I was playing all the time, but I was either practicing or I was beating the computer all the time. So yeah, it's like I beat the game with every character, learned to do every single move with every character, looked in magazines, figured out new moves and all of that jazz. It was just the Renaissance age, man. And I think at some point in there, at the end of high school, I peaked, Don't know exactly when I could say it happened, but in all of the games, all the fighting games that I actually owned, which, there's pretty much all of them in there somewhere, I knew everything. I knew all the moves for all the characters in all the games. That's just a result of training. You know what I mean? I wouldn't necessarily call that pro, but that's kind of simmering somewhere below the boiling point of you're a pro. It's kind of like you now have that ability where if you were to practice a little bit more and harness some things and actually do enough PvP, do more competition type of work instead of, basically the computer, that's all you could do is play against the computer all the time, then yeah, you could be a pro. And so that's at a young age. This is like, 1997, 1998, around there. I have to say that's just yet another notch, is you become better than just very good. You become better than intermediate. That is kind of how it's been with me from then until now. It's been, I haven't had the opportunity to get out there and compete and do the tournaments and stuff, but I have always maintained just a high knowledge base of how to do of the moves and skills. So now, looking back, I call myself a veteran. That's the next peg for me. I'm a veteran. It's a combination of, I guess, the hobby of video games that I've had for, many years, basically since, whatever age it was, 7 years old, I guess, since I got the Nintendo. The combination of experience, all of that from the past, and being able to do all these moves and having the timing, understanding, even though my reflexes might not be quite as top-notch as it was when I was 18, and even though I don't necessarily care as much as I used to, when I actually had something to prove, I had that ice in my veins to win, you know what I'm saying? But now, I could care less. I've proven my part, I did that in college. But, this is an interesting place to be. I'm a veteran now, and a veteran is just somebody who has the ability, but, I'm not attending tournaments or anything like that. So it's a certain amount of skill. I think a lot of the guys online are around my age, and they're veterans. They're not pros. They're not going to tournaments trying to win money, and it's that. And then I think the next step up, of course, would have to be something like the actual pros, the next step up from veteran. The guys who do this for money, for a living, understand the risks with these moves. It's more like a job for them, Maybe they're not quite as excited and having fun with it as a veteran like myself is, but they're doing it for a living. This is what they do, and so they probably have their on and off days with the gaming. But, that's pretty much it as far as skills are concerned. I think that there's novice, there's intermediate, there's, it's kind of like, becoming very good. I don't really have a name for it yet. Maybe I'll make up something. I won't say master, but, it's something. I won't say Jedi either. How about that? But it's definitely above average. It's better than intermediate. It's a very high level of skills. Then after that, it's a veteran. After that, it's a pro. All pros are veterans for the most part, or have been playing long enough where you could consider them a veteran, That's my own assessment of skills. Hope you guys enjoyed. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know. Peace.